Is that our opening theme?
I guess so. Here we are again, and we decided to go ahead and do it.
I think that was taken straight out of Blade Runner 2049.
That sound effect?
Yeah. That was,
Maybe it was, because now that you mention it, the soundtrack to that did have some moments.
I think Hans Zimmer it was him and somebody else worked in tandem on the score, but I thought not to just launch right into this thing.
Why not? This is Rocko Jerome.
And this is Jeremy Hicks.
And we're going to talk about Blade Runner today.
Yeah. So with this latest film, I can't remember who the other guy was that Hans Zimmer worked with, but I thought it did an excellent job of kind of capturing and reimagining the original score.
Right, and the original score is by Vangelis.
Yes.
Is that right? Vangelis? Yes. And I honestly think it's a bit much, the Vangelis score. It's a bit yawny for me, both in terms of YANNI and YAWNY. It sort of took me out of the experience a little bit when I watched the movie. I just watched the first Blade Runner. It's funny to even have to say that now, isn't it? It's the first Blade Runner.
Well, you and I were talking about this, and interestingly enough, we both decided to revisit the first film before seeing the sequel.
It was a long time ago that I saw it, and I think even at the time, I was probably, in my early teens. I think even at the time, I was like, that was a little bit heady for me. I don't know if I understood what was happening there. Or maybe it was just really slow and boring.
So really, you had not seen it as an adult?
Not that I recall.
Interesting.
Yeah.
See, I was, for better or worse, a film major at one point.
Right.
And so, you know how it is. You reach a certain age and you want to listen to all the great albums. You want to read all the great books. You want to watch all the great films.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate growing up. My father has always had an HBO subscription.
Oh, wow.
So I remember seeing Blade Runner as a kid and just being taken with it visually.
Right. Sure.
I may not have understood the existential dread.
Sure.
I certainly understand it now.
Right.
Yeah, but
definitely get it now.
but just always thought it was just a visually stunning film, and it was re-released on DVD in, I believe, maybe mid-2000s.
Yes.
And we kind of were back and forth about this on Facebook some, about the 7 different versions.
Yeah, there's literally 7 different versions.
Yeah.
Now that's also kind of a little bit, because there's 3 major versions.
Yes, I
agree. And then the other differences are very slight.
Yes, they're very
sort of
subtle.
like Star Wars. If you're going to talk about the Star Wars different versions that Lucas has done, there's actually probably 12 of those.
Man.
But some of those changes are just a matter of the title crawl a little bit.
I mean, that probably warrants an episode all its own. And like the maniac that I am, of course, I keep track of all the films that I've watched.
Like you write them down?
Like I have a spreadsheet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so I mostly do that because of probably too much LSD and artificial sweeteners. I don't have a great memory.
I like that the LSD and the artificial sweeteners are right there neck and neck for you. That's good.
And so, yeah, I would have to go back and look, but it seems like every Star Wars release since the remastered VHS in the 90s, there's all these subtle changes.
Well, there's always been. Like in the first movie, it wasn't always called A New Hope, right?
It was just Star Wars?
When the movie first came out, it was just called Star Wars. Crawl came up, Star Wars, Time of Rebellion, whatever, Civil War. And that was the movie. And there was a lot more times in the movie where Luke would talk about or to Biggs, who you never saw. like, Biggs, look out! And then I think after the movie came out, they were like, man, we cut out the part with Biggs, and nobody knows what the fuck he's talking about. So they changed that. So by the time they did the first re-release of the movie in like 1978, they were already changing things. And Blade Runner is similar. So the 7 different versions of Blade Runner are actually not all that different from each other, aside from the 3 main different versions, which was the original one with the voiceover that Harrison Ford did.
I believe that is and I'm looking at my notes here, but that's the U.S. theatrical release from
Correct.
1982.
Yeah. And that was the version that I saw first. And
same here.
What I now know about that was that the voiceover, they made them do that. Ridley Scott and Harrison Ford didn't want to do it. And knowing a thing or two about Harrison Ford, when you listen to the voiceover, which I've gone back and watched some clips, I think he deliberately did a shitty job hoping that they would chuck it or just to torpedo the whole movie.
Well, I've certainly heard that. Now, whether or not he actually did that, I think is up for debate.
Yeah, sure.
But at the
he's never going to come out and tell you that.
A lot of debate about the original film.
Yeah.
That's a good example.
Right.
Probably the most famous debate to stem from the first film is whether or not Deckard is a replicant.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Right.
What's your opinion of that?
Okay. So the take that I've always had with fiction, and maybe this is as a person who writes fiction, but probably just as a big geek, is that questions that are not answered in the text, there is no answer to those questions, ultimately. Right? So I think that you are meant to think he could just as well be a replicant as not. Right? And it's easy to kind of like fall on the trend, like he is or he isn't. Like, but no, there's that one part with the unicorn and all that sort of stuff, and you can fight about it. But I think if it's not answered in the text, I think I don't know that Ridley Scott ever had any interviews about this.
He actually did.
Did?
Yeah.
Did he say? Did he give an answer?
He the word fuck is somewhere in the quote.
Okay.
And basically he's like...
That's helping my case.
He is a replicant.
Oh, really?
And interestingly enough, one of the screenwriters and Harrison Ford say that he is human.
Okay.
But Ridley Scott's argument is that there is no film without Deckard being a replicant.
Really?
Yeah. So...
That's interesting.
Yeah. And I want to say he was like... I'm the fucking director, and he's a replicant.
Okay.
It was something to that extent.
Well, if that's the case, I wonder how he feels about the fact that he has obviously lived past his 4-year expiration date in Blade Runner 2049.
Well, that's something else that's kind of open to interpretation. Right. And real quick, you'd mentioned that there were 3 main versions. So there was the
original
1982 U.S.
with
theatrical
the voiceover,
release,
which is heavily edited.
Yes.
It got to the point, from what I gather, that Ridley Scott kind of just threw in the towel and said, "Okay, do whatever you want to it."
And we'll mention quickly that has the happy ending,
right? Which was actually, as I'm sure that you're aware, and a lot of the listeners, if we have any, are also aware, was that the scene where they're driving away and somehow they've just gone to a place that is no longer apocalyptic, was taken from. Help me out here. What was the name of the movie?
The Shining.
The Shining. Couldn't think of it.
Yeah.
All I could think of was "Here's Johnny."
Yeah.
So that was actually, if you ever seen the beginning of The Shining, where the car is driving in the hills, they just tape that in there, which is so infuriating. It's such a ridiculous thing to do.
And apparently Kubrick was cool with it because, not to get started on this, but a story that I always thought that was cool about Kubrick was apparently, after 2001 filmed, he famously had everything destroyed.
Yeah.
And was like, I don't want anyone else to ever use this stuff.
Right.
So when I heard that he was sort of generous with this B-roll footage from The Shining, I was like, I'm a little surprised to hear that he would do that.
Yeah. He was also really big about he didn't want anything to come out after the theatrical release or would it be a letterbox edition? He wanted it all to be cut for television.
For 2001?
For everything he did. Every single movie he did.
He was not a fan of the widescreen
Well,
format?
he was for when you actually sit in a theater and watch the movie. When
Uh-huh.
he said for TV, no, you don't get it. Fuck you if you weren't there to see the movie when it came out. And then as soon as he died, they all came out in widescreen.
Wow.
Like all of them. And he was only, I mean, it was obvious that they had been planning it because he was like in the ground and like later that week it was announced.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, if that's not a fuck you, I don't know what
Yeah,
is.
both ways. He said fuck you and the industry said fuck you back.
Last two versions real quick. There was the 1992 director's cut,
Right.
which
Although it was a director's cut, he did not actually do it.
Yeah, that's
he
what
was
I-
shooting another movie at the time.
Yeah.
Thelma and Louise,
that's what
which I forgot he made.
I'd forgotten about that too.
Yeah,
Wow.
he was making Thelma and Louise.
But yes, interestingly enough, the director's cut that actually wasn't cut by the director.
Right, yeah.
And
He just said,
and then
I guess maybe he was still in the wilderness on it. You have to imagine that he must have still been hurt by what happened.
Probably.
To say, okay, call it the director's cut, whatever. Because that's a weird move.
interestingly enough, though, and again, we sort of talked about this. It's my favorite cut of the film.
Really?
Yeah, because it does away with the voiceover. It does away with the happy ending, and it gives you the more what's the word I'm looking for? Ambiguous ending.
Okay.
Yeah,
So then the final cut.
came out in 2007.
And when I went to the movies the other day and saw AMC had the movie, I don't know which version I saw. There was the scene with the unicorn where he's having a dream about a unicorn.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that it ended was, we're obviously doing spoilers here, was that...
It's a 35-year film. People,
I think
yeah.
we're good. Edward James almost says, too bad she won't live. And then he goes back to his apartment and she's there.
Yeah.
And he says, do you love me? And she says, yes. And he says, then trust me. And then they're leaving and he sees a unicorn.
The origami.
Origami, which was Edward James Olmos's thing
Yeah.
all throughout the movie, is to fuck with them with different origami things. So either he was there and he just wants Deckard to know that he was there, or he's going to follow them and kill them, which makes less sense. To me, it seems like he was saying, okay, I want you to know that I know. And if I wanted to, I could have aced you both, but I didn't. And then that's the end of the movie.
That was always sort of my take on it as well, was that he wanted him to know that he knew,
Right.
but he was fine with it.
So now, is that the final cut or is that the director's cut?
Well, looking at my notes, it gives a specific example here. So it says the final cut contains the original full-length version of the Unicorn Dream,
Okay.
which had never been in any version and has been restored. Additionally,
What else happens in the unicorn dream besides the unicorns just kind of running?
I just feel like that it was just more of the unicorn running.
Okay. So funny that us geeks can get so weirded out by something like an extra 2 minutes of unicorn running.
Some
Really makes a
some
difference.
serious unicorn frolicking
Right,
action.
yeah.
And then lastly, it says all of the additional violence and alternate edits from the international cut have been inserted.
Okay.
So again, very subtle nuances.
Sure.
I mean, it's not like they went and changed the ending song on Return of the Jedi or something.
Right, yeah. Something really major like that.
But again, my favorite cut is the director's cut. And yes, I always thought that was a very haunting quote at the end that Edward James Olmos's character said. He says, "Too bad she won't live."
Right.
But then again, who really does?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then so here's where there's a lot of conjecture is that the unicorn, after Harrison Ford had a dream about a unicorn, which would indicate perhaps that that's an implanted memory, and Edward James Olmos knows that, and he's really fucking with him, right? But okay, so here's one where we're going to talk about another movie briefly. But I think it's one where it gives a good example of sort of my school of thought about this. If it's ambiguous in the movie, there's no actual answer to the question. The movie Inception. which I'm sure you've seen.
I have. It's been a number of years, though.
But you remember at the end of Inception? Do you remember the end of Inception?
That is, again, it's somewhat of a... The ending is up for interpretation.
Exactly. It looks like Leonardo DiCaprio and his team have gotten away with it, and then he goes home to his wife or whoever it is. I kind of forget that part. But it looks like he's in a happy situation. And the thing that he does to see if he is in the dream or not in the dream, if he's in reality or if he's just inside of his own mind, which in the case that he's in now, he's going to be in his own mind forever because it means they pulled the plug on him, essentially. He does a thing where he spins a silver dollar type thing.
Yeah. And
the silver dollar, if it falls, that's reality. If it keeps spinning, it means that he's inside of his own subconscious. So I saw this movie on opening night when it came out. I'm going to say that because that's going to be important in a moment. So he spins the coin, and the coin is spinning, and you see him kind of like go off with his wife and his kids, and then the movie ends. And when that happened, I screamed at the theater, "You motherfucker! You God damn it!" I was pissed because it felt like Christopher Nolan had done that shit to me before, and that I had just been sort of taken for a ride. But here's what I thought about later, and what I think is the ultimate point of that, at least as far as what it means to me. He goes to spin the coin, and then he goes off with his wife and kids, which to me means that he is saying to himself and to the viewer, if you're paying attention, you know what? I don't care. You know, I don't care anymore if I'm in the dream, or I don't want to know. I don't want to know if this is not reality. So he goes away, and you don't see if the coin stops or doesn't stop. Because, again, it doesn't actually make a lot of difference.
Right. Ultimately, he had achieved what he wanted to achieve.
Right. So in Blade Runner, since it's so much about what it is to be human, what free will is, all these sorts of questions, it doesn't ultimately... It's better if you don't know if Deckard is a replicant or not.
Right. And leaving the theater last night, my wife asked me, is he a replicant? Is he human? And I still don't know if 2049 really answers that.
I don't think it does. And there's one part where they kind of toy with it.
Where Jared Leto's character...
Yes. When he says, is this all just a design? Which to me, one of the things when I was watching Blade Runner, a friend of mine, because I asked a friend if he wanted to go and he couldn't make it. And I sort of told him, like, it's been a while since I saw it. And he said, how did it strike you this time? And I said, well, in some ways it was not as good as I remembered, and in some ways it was much better. And, it's an art film, and I have a better appreciation of art now than I did as a kid. But also there's things about Blade Runner that are sort of cheap and cheesy in ways that I feel, as far as storytelling techniques, that are in some ways, I think, sort of meant to echo and perhaps pay homage to film noir.
Absolutely.
But one of the things about it that really bugs me is that, and this is something that's hard to do in movies anyway, is that there's always going to be a love story in so many movies. And, like how many movies during the 80s that were like action movies about guys killing each other and like all sorts of shit. And there's got to be like, he meets the woman and they fall in love. So at the end, it's the man. Like, why is Top Gun a movie about a guy and a woman falling in love? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Isn't that weird when you really think about it? So like he meets this robot and like he's a guy who doesn't seem like he has very much of a connection with anybody. And then she comes over, and over the course of a 20-minute conversation, they fall in love. And, that's hard to watch at this point in my life. I've seen enough other stuff where it's like, oh, gosh, yeah.
Well, yeah, I couldn't tell you how many times over the years I have roped women into watching movies by just saying, it's a love story.
Yeah, maybe that's what, But now we can see through it, It's just like how in the 80s there was a sex scene in every movie. They figured out they could get away with it.
Yeah.
They could show tits in an R movie.
Yeah.
And, again, Top Gun. Like, there's no reason for my mom and dad. Top Gun, he likes G.I. Joe, he's watching. And, halfway through, there's fucking.
Yeah.
And then you got to sit there with your parents.
Well, I mean, growing up with HBO, it was exposed to
A lot of things. Yeah.
a lot of things.
Because it was just the way it was. So I kind of felt like that was because the guy who made this movie, do you remember his name?
He is French Canadian,
Right.
but I do not remember.
I don't remember his name either.
He directed Arrival.
Right, which I haven't seen, and now we'll have to.
Yeah.
But it's clear that Blade Runner is a favorite movie of his, and he spent a lot of time thinking about it. So that being the case, I imagine that maybe he has had some of the same feelings that I've had, and he felt like this was an opportunity to, I don't want to use a word as strong as fix that, but to maybe kind of give you a little bit of an out for like, well, maybe that's why they fell in love, like they were programmed to do so.
Yeah, no, I was perfectly fine with the suggestion that maybe their entire relationship had been orchestrated,
Right.
because I think that is much more believable than two people meeting and falling in love in 20 minutes.
Right, especially when one is a robot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So very, very well done. It's the kind of thing that whenever I see it done in sequels or continuations, and it's kind of a retcon, retroactive continuity a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe, but it just sort of hints at it. And maybe he was just saying that to fuck with Deckard, because Deckard knows things that he wants Deckard to say.
Yeah.
So I mean, like sitting in the theater and seeing that, I was like, oh, that's good. Having just seen the first Blade Runner 4 days ago for the first time in a long time, and being like, I don't know about that part. And like the one thing that I was most kind of not cool about with the movie being handled in the sequel, I think was very well done. And that was one of my favorite things about the movie, honestly.
Well, again, I think that it to me, it never answers the question of whether or not Deckard is a replicant or he's not. And I think that it's that mystery that sort of keeps Blade Runner relevant.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Because, I mean, I don't know about you personally, but I mean, I don't deal in a lot of absolutes.
Sure.
I mean, there are certainly
in real life, absolutely.
Yeah, there are certainly times where I wish things were more black and white than what they are.
Uh-huh.
But it's been my experience that definitives are hard to come by.
Right, and it's not really central to the plot either, whether or not he is or isn't.
Yeah, and
if it was and they didn't answer it, that would make me a little. That's my problem with a lot of David Lynch.
Well, that's exactly where I was going to go. I was going to say, yeah, you would, interestingly enough, I think that is what keeps Twin Peaks interesting. Yeah. But there were a lot of people...
I never really watched it, but I do know that there's some David Lynch things. Like Blue Velvet and Wild at Heart that I do like, and there's things that I don't like from him, which is like Lost Highway or
Mulholland
Drive, because those to me don't ultimately go anywhere, and at the end I'm frustrated.
Inland Empire, did you ever see it?
I never saw that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because that is why I think I'm drawn to Lynch's work and was ultimately drawn to Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049 is because I appreciate the fact that you don't get a lot of answers, much like in life. And some people they want to go to a film and they absolutely want all of their questions answered. Right. And I'm perfectly fine with those questions not being answered. I think that I appreciate trying to draw my own conclusions from things rather than having things spelled out for me. And I think that that's ultimately what art does for me. Is it challenges me. It makes me look at things in a different light. And I've always appreciated how you and I could look at the same piece of art and take away completely two different meanings from it.
Sure. Yeah.
I've never been one of these people who was hung up on interpretations of song lyrics. Yeah. What it means to me is ultimately what's important.
Well, that's certainly very true. And when you have access to someone or somebody or any number of people who have written songs that mean something to you and you can talk to them about it, I don't know if I always can recommend that experience.
What's the
That
what's
could be
it,
strange.
what's the quote? It's something about I'm going to butcher this, but it's something along the lines of you know, careful about meeting your heroes or something like that. And yeah, you have firsthand experience.
Yeah,
with
I've
that.
met a lot of my heroes. There's very few of my heroes that are alive that I have not met, to be honest. And the thing that I would say is just ask good questions. Try to ask good questions.
Yeah.
And if you love the person's work, then you will automatically have good questions, probably.
Because there's sincerity there.
Right, absolutely. And that's usually a good place to start with that kind of thing. But to go back to the topic, I don't really know that, like, there's not a hard line, and there's certainly certain things that I feel different about than others. But I feel like with Blade Runner, the Blade Runner is not a movie about whether or not this guy is a replicant, right? If the movie was about whether or not this guy is a replicant, and they couldn't be bothered to give me an answer to that question, I don't know how I'd feel about that. But to me, that's not really the central point of the movie, right?
Sure.
And one of the things that I thought was very interesting in watching 2049, which I'm really glad that I saw Blade Runner again just recently, because there's a lot of things that are echoed. Like there's a scene where, well, okay, hang on, before we get too far ahead of ourselves. I thought it was really interesting that at the beginning of the movie, you're about 20 minutes in, and you know for sure that you are watching a replicant.
Yes.
Ryan Gosling's character is a replicant. It is stated. It is factual, and it's like it's not even a question.
Yeah, they're just right out of the gate with it. And I thought that was cool too, because you don't have to worry about whether or not he's a replicant.
Yeah.
You know, much like you're trying to figure that out in the original film. Nope, they just tell you right out the gate.
So it's like we're not going to do that again.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times with these sequels and reboots or whatever, there's always going to be that thing where it's like, well, you're just remaking the movie again. This felt like a movie that was much more of an artistic expression than anything to do with trying to drive sales of shit.
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of shit.
I
don't see a lot of Blade Runner toys or, lunch boxes or anything.
That's what I was just going to say. I've not seen the Ryan Gosling action figure at Meijer.
Yeah. Like, I don't think there is any of that stuff for this, which is nice. I do like all that kind of shit. And believe me, if there was like a Drive, if they made a line of Drive action figures, I'd buy all of them and love them. I'd ask for them for Christmas, and I would enjoy them very much. Yeah, I felt like the making of this movie, they didn't, it's 3 hours long. Like I don't, this, and it's apparently not doing well at the box office, which is funny because we're recording this on Sunday and the movie came out on Friday.
Right.
Like Thursday at midnight or 7 o'clock. I just saw it. I saw it in a full theater.
Really? There was a sold out crowd?
Theater was sold out. Yeah.
See, Elaine and I, my wife, we went and saw it Saturday night at 7:30.
Yeah. And
I made it a point to reserve our seats ahead of time.
Right.
Because I wanted to see it in IMAX.
Yeah.
And so, I know where I like to sit for IMAX movies. Sure. Got our tickets, and we got there, I don't know, maybe 5-10 minutes ahead of time.
Yeah.
And it was maybe a quarter of the way sold out.
Right. Oh.
Yeah. So.
Well, I saw it in the middle of the day on a Sunday.
Okay.
And it was full. And it's one of those things where it's like, I've been looking forward to this movie for as long as I've known it exists. And it's funny to me when Saturday they're like, movie bombed, disappointment. Sorry guys, we're fucked.
Yeah.
And it's not, the weekend's not even over yet. I had shit to do on Friday and Saturday. Like, come on. You know what I mean? Come on, man.
No, they're already declaring it a failure, a commercial failure, and it's interesting because that parallels the original film.
Yeah,
the original film was a failure, and then it went on to become this cult hit.
Yeah. And
people are saying, well, after this, and there was another sequel that came out recently that underperformed, and
what was that?
I was trying to.
Was it Kingsman?
No. It was something else. But Hollywood is now saying that okay, we get the message. Consumers are not interested in sequels. Yet, if you look at the slate of like the next several years of films, it's all nothing but sequels.
Uh-huh.
And so it's like, well, you've already committed
Right.
to all of this ahead of time, so you're kind of stuck with it now.
Yeah, right.
And it's unfortunate because,
well, it's just,
the people are interested in what, 4, 5 different Pirates of the Caribbean films, and they make a worthy successor to Blade Runner, and apparently just not that many people are interested in it.
yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's. I think that it's time. I feel like when we were growing up, like I remember when Pulp Fiction came out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Pulp Fiction was seismic. It was huge. And the big thing was, I was a freshman or sophomore in high school, and it was legitimately life changing for me. Before that, I was really into Star Wars and Evil Dead, and that was like my main shit. And then after that, it's like, wow, like you can have this music, and you can kind of have this feel, and it's adult, and there's a lot to get into here. And then that led me to Scorsese, right? And that led me to a lot of different music and all sorts of things. And it just sort of changed the way that I talked. You had a lot of kids that all of a sudden were really into sitting around and talking about, whether or not McDonald's was as good as Hardee's or whatever. And they were talking about it like, hey, it's a fucking good sandwich. Like if I heard me taping myself, then I'm sure I'd be mortified.
You'd be putting on your best Goodfellas impersonation.
Oh yeah, or like trying to sound like John Travolta talking about the mayonnaise on the fries and stuff. And like I remember that Forrest Gump and Pulp Fiction came out the same year, and it was like if you were square, you liked Forrest Gump, and if you were cool, you were into Pulp Fiction. And it was like a shorthand. Like I remember being in class, this happened at least twice, where somebody else would be like, hey man, you seen Pulp Fiction? You seem like the kind of guy that liked Pulp Fiction. And then I could be like, yeah, you should see Reservoir Dogs, same director, man, it's really cool. And then like, you could figure out right away whether or not you're going to like somebody. And now it seems like there's just so much shit that comes out, and there's YouTube, and there's all these different ways that people have access to everything all the time. Like you could only go here locally to the Vogue Theater, was the only place showing Pulp Fiction when it first came out. And like you had to know somebody that knew about it. That was my take on that.
The Vogue Theater was kind of the art house theater in Louisville years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, because this would have been before my time.
Yeah, Vogue was cool.
So what's the equivalent of that now in Louisville? Like in Lexington, you have the Kentucky Theater.
I suppose Baxter, but it's really sad because Baxter, while I do like Baxter, is nowhere near as cool as the Vogue was, because the Vogue was an old, like for real theater,
right?
And luckily, the facade is still there,
right? Which
for some people is just kind of sad. I think it's cool that that's even still there. And
yeah,
there's a nice store there called Clodhoppers and stuff like that.
That's in St. Matthews.
Yeah,
right?
I was just there today. I got some ice cream at the homemade pie and ice cream kitchen there.
There's a steak taco joint by there that's good.
I never ate there. I'll have to do that. I'm in that area a lot.
So there was something that I wanted to ask you about. You were talking about we were talking about this the Ryan Gosling character, and how right out of the gate they make it known that he's a replicant,
right.
And these are how replicants are treated
yes.
in the year 2049.
Right.
But the interesting twist that they have on the character to me is that they set you up for this kind of cliche hero's journey.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much we're going to get into spoilers here or not. So
we're way in.
So
may as well
we're all in.
We're all in.
All
Let's say at this point, however many minutes in we are, Brian or whoever, please just say from this point forward, we're discussing spoilers for Blade Runner 2049.
So with that said, despite the fact that they remove all, they remove the notion that Ryan Gosling, is he human? Is
right.
he a replicant?
Yeah.
They let you know that he is in fact a replicant.
Right.
But they set you up for this kind of cliche hero's journey,
yeah.
where he may in fact be this god child.
Almost certainly is. He's either the product of two replicants or a human and a replicant.
Right, but either way, it would change the world.
Yeah.
And so they set you up with this hero's journey,
and it's going to be him,
and it's unfolding all these clues.
Right,
He's
yeah.
He is the mystery,
right?
And then they pull the rug right out from under him.
Yeah.
And I so love that.
I do too.
Because you see films like, A friend of mine, Chris Dillard. I don't know if you've met Chris or not, but Chris is a film buff, studied film,
Right.
Has a lot of opinions about film, and him and I were talking recently, and something that him and I both agree upon is in the Star Wars universe, everybody has a fucking destiny.
Yeah, right.
And I so love the fact
Everybody's related. Everybody knows each other.
and I so love the fact that Kay does not have a destiny.
Yeah.
Because how many times, and here is where, I really enjoy these films that are steeped in existential crisis.
Uh-huh.
I don't know what that says about me, but
You know what I think it says is that you know a thing or two about a thing or two, and you've lived, and you've had a large gamut of feelings, and for something to get through to you, it can't be something that you've seen a million times ago or a million times before.
Well, how often is it that we seek purpose in life, and we want to be the hero,
Right.
when in fact, for most of us, at the end of the day, we're just trying to survive.
Yeah, sure.
There is a great quote that I hesitate to call him a mutual friend because I lost track of him a long time ago, but Harvey.
Oh, sure.
Do you remember?
Let's talk about Harvey for a second, because Harvey is a person who doesn't get nearly enough credit. If you're a Louisville resident and you used to shop at Holly Cook, which was a place that I worked at for a little while, as well as Jeremy, though we worked there at different times, they always had very good, what you would call bargain books. They're actually called remainders, as in when they make a print run of a book and they print too many and it ends up not being as big a hit, they have all these books that they'll sell for less than they're worth.
That's your clearance section.
That's your clearance section. So the thing that kept Holly Cook going for years, much longer than it would have, was that they had a bunch of really good remainders. And the reason they had remainders was there was this bad motherfucker named Harvey who a few times a year they'd give him a few $1,000s and he would take a truck and he'd come back with all these books that they could sell. A book that had been like $25 and they could sell it for $4. Hardcovers, usually. And that was the bread and butter for Holly Cook for a long time. They made a lot of money off of that. And Harvey is a guy who does not suffer fools. He has tattoos of all of his favorite bands. He's kind of a Frank Zappa looking kind of a guy. He's a Detroit guy. And if you can be friends with Harvey, I mean, I think both of us were pretty much like, had pretty good man crushes on Harvey.
Oh, absolutely.
Like we want Harvey to like us and think we're cool. I used to, in the break room of Holly Cook, there was one time where I was reading a Lester Bangs book, and I was holding it in such a way that he could see a very unnatural angle to be reading the book, because I wanted Harvey to see that I was reading it. And it worked. And he was like, "Hey, you like Lester Bangs?" And I was like, "Yeah, man, I like Lester Bangs." He's like, "Yeah, you read this?" "Yeah, I read that, yeah." "All right, man, yeah." And then that meant that Harvey and I were cool. And then Harvey invited me to a concert, and I didn't go. And Harvey was mad at me for a while.
Sadly, for whatever reason, he's just one of those people that I lost track of.
Well, Harvey is not hard to lose track of. He's not a social media guy.
Right.
He doesn't like to talk on the phone. Like, I've seen him around, but like, you enjoy him while you're in front of him, because he's not gonna. No, he operates in his own stratosphere.
I think one of the last times I saw him, this would have been probably around sort of the same time I last saw you.
Yeah.
So maybe 7-8 years ago, he was getting ready to attend a reunion of the people that he used to run a bar or a music club in Michigan.
Yes.
And they were having like a 25 year reunion or something.
Right.
So I imagine that would have been a good time.
That would have been something. I mean, he's a guy who magnetic personality. I like him a lot.
Yeah. But anyway.
Yeah.
And I'm really hoping that you can remember this quote, because I misquote it all the time.
Yeah.
But it's something to
It's something Harvey said?
Yes,
Okay.
and I shared it with you, and you were just so struck with it.
Okay.
And I think we both found it fairly profound.
Okay.
But it was something to the extent of he was talking about the difference between musicians and the rest of us.
Okay.
And he said something along the lines of, musicians are able to channel their anger and create something with it, while it just slowly kills the rest of
It's
us.
just slowly kill, and I can hear him saying that.
Yeah. And that is not verbatim what he said, but it was something along those lines.
Did he say that to you, and then he said it to me, or we were both? There was one time where you and I and him in his house were hanging out.
Yes, he used to have probably
a New
still
Year's
does
Eve party.
New Year's Eve parties.
And I got invited, and I would go.
Yes.
And then I got invited to one, and I didn't go, and then I never got invited again. And New Year's Eve is real estate, man. That's tough. There's a lot of parties going. I used to try to go to every New Year's Eve party I got invited to, which was fun because it was like that movie Four Rooms.
Yeah,
because you go from party to party, and it's a different deal at each one.
Same here.
And then
Same
I
here.
finally got to the point where I was like, man, I'm too old to be driving around in the middle of the night. Like, I'm just going to go to one party and just chill and drink my beer and whatever, But the thing there was that I didn't really know anybody but him.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's always like, I didn't have any girlfriends at that time. And it's kind of like, or at least any that I wanted to see on New Year's Eve, and it was like when it would be midnight or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a weird feeling to be surrounded by people you only kind of know.
Yeah.
You just sort of, it feels strange.
No, I agree. And I went 2 or 3 times, and he was the only person that I knew. But some of these characters would come back year after year, so I sort of came to recognize them, but never got to know them
Not real well
as friends.
Yeah. I mean, I knew them as my New Year's Eve friends,
Yeah.
And there was one year where I remember there were some people there that were acting like assholes. And it was like, do you not realize the magnitude of the fact that you got invited to Harvey's house on New Year's Eve? And there was a situation where there was this girl who was really drunk and sloppy. And I was trying to talk to one of the regulars that you were talking about.
Yeah.
And I was trying to talk to her about something really important that she wanted to ask me about. I'm not going to go into what it was, but it was something that I could help her with. And this girl's like, I know you and I have such a connection. Because you said our necklace was cool. And yes, I think it's cool too. Because, she was nervous when she got there and she was like, oh, nice necklace or whatever. And she got sloppy drunk. And there was like the guy that she was with who was like reading a book. And I let it go on for like 5 minutes. And I was like, hey, listen, man, you got to take care of this. I really did. I was like, you got to handle this.
Yeah.
And he was like, come on, we got to go. And it's like, don't bring anybody who's going to get sloppy drunk and interrupt everybody's good time and just stand there and let it happen. It's not cool.
And I mean, it probably annoyed Harley because
Harvey hated it
because
and he even said he was like, they're never coming back. Do you remember how you found out about the New Year's Eve party? Because I told you about it. Do you remember that? Because I was like, he does a really good party.
Yes.
And then you went to Harvey and you said, what does the guy have to do to get invited to one of those parties? And he said, do you remember what he said to you?
No.
He said, who you been talking to? And then you had to be like, Rocko,
Yeah.
loose lips,
Yeah.
Right.
That's a guy who, if we were to ever have a guest on the show, that's a guest.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, it's a 4-hour podcast.
Yeah.
Because there's a guy who has seen some shit.
He has. He would always sort of like, like when somebody like praises you and you feel weird about it, he would always be like, Rocko knows way more about music than me. He knows 4 times what I know. I don't know if that's true, Like I know a lot about like certain things, but like, you get me out of my I'm one of those guys that knows a lot about the things I'm interested in and I can't do anything else.
Sure. Sure.
Like, so.
No, I think it really says something that, you and I have a mutual man crush, because I don't think either one of us have many.
No, gosh, no.
So it's interesting that that we both dote on him as much as we do.
Yeah.
But he's
I would say
a very
so.
cool guy.
Yeah, he really is. He really is.
How the hell did we get here?
You wanted to say the quotes. And I think that's how that ended up.
Somehow it tied into the film, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we were talking about
the fact that we figure out right away that he's a replicant.
So we've established that.
Yeah.
And then the hero's journey.
Right.
So
and it doesn't go the way that everybody would assume.
And that to me was easily one of my favorite parts of the film.
Same here.
Because
sitting in the theater and being like, "Oh, but really? Like it's going to be that he's his son and like he just happens to be
right."
You know.
So let me ask you this: do you think because he ends up meeting who we later find out is in fact Rachel and Deckard's daughter?
Yeah.
But at the time, we don't know that.
You don't know that.
He doesn't know that.
Yeah.
I thought it was a little strange when she was crying after she had peered into his mind and had seen the vision of
and one
him.
of the things that's cool about that is that they establish her as somebody who's obviously a very sort of a sweet person who doesn't get a lot from other people. So maybe she's just so moved by it. So it's like, okay, but like, and she says that's someone else's memory. But at the same time, I mean, the way that I read it as the movie was transpiring, I was just like, wow, like she didn't get any hugs.
Yeah, there was, I mean, there was certainly something that was that I found interesting about her, but there was no way that I thought, oh, well, this is Deckard and Rachel's daughter. I certainly didn't think that, but I thought, well, this is interesting that this has affected her as much as it has. So what I was going to ask you was, and just to clear this up, her job is she creates memories for replicants, which is kind of their emotional baseline.
Right.
And so she is this architect of memories.
Right.
And she peers into Kay's mind, who's played by Ryan Gosling, and she sees this vision of this, what we think at the time as a boy in the ruins of this place down in these furnaces, and it affects her very emotionally. So I guess what I'm curious about, what your take on it was that, do you think that she specifically implanted that in him so he would find her and set off this whole chain of events? Or do you think it's a complete coincidence?
Well, that's something that I hadn't really thought about, because stupid me, it hadn't occurred to me that Kay was never a child. At that point, I was still thinking of Kay as someone who had been a child once, instead of being a replicant that had only been however old he was from the time that they decided that they needed him.
Yeah.
So the records were such... This is something I hadn't even really considered. So the records were such that there was a boy and a girl that had the same DNA code that were at the same place. Right?
Right. And we find out later that Deckard had orchestrated that to disguise her identity.
Right. So it would seem like maybe Deckard had set that up. But that would be from a very early period, too. So, yeah, maybe so. Maybe she did that deliberately.
Yeah. Just a thought.
Yeah. No, that seems very possible. I also think it's interesting that she's basically like the boy in the bubble kind of a deal. And the reason for that is that maybe her genetic makeup is fucked up and weird because she was never meant to be.
Yeah. And that's something I thought about in hindsight as well. I was like, well, if she's the product of this replicant creation or human replicant creation, it would make sense that, I could see how she could have some autoimmune issues. Yeah. So it was. I thought that was interesting.
That was very well done. This is what happens when somebody gets to make a movie after they've been thinking about it their whole lives too. You know what I mean? I mean that's a lot of times it's like there's that new show that's done by the Family Guy guy, Seth MacFarlane.
Yeah,
has like a show that's Star Trek, but it isn't.
Right.
And I'm hearing that it's great and it's better than Star Trek has been in a long time.
That's what I was going to say. I hear that it's actually more Star Trek than the new Star Trek series.
And to me, that's not surprising because Seth MacFarlane is probably a guy who has loved Star Trek since he was a small kid. And he now has found a way to make Star Trek. And yeah, he's going to have some interesting things to say with it. You know, that's how, again, we keep going back to Star Wars, which I guess shows how important that is to everything. But
oh, sure.
He wanted to make Flash Gordon and he couldn't get the rights.
Really?
Oh yeah. You didn't know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah. He wanted to, the beginning of Star Wars with the crawl.
Yeah.
That is a direct ripoff. There's no other way to put it. Of the old Flash Gordon movie serials.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So, like, it would be Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe in half-hour installments 1 through 20. And the reason that he started with episode 4 was that most kids didn't ever get to see a serial from 1 to 20 because they just didn't go to the movies every Saturday. So maybe like another kid was like, that Flash Gordon shit's hot. That's what they said in the 40s. The kids, that Flash Gordon shit is hot. So then they knew to go see Flash Gordon, but they didn't see it from the beginning, right? That was actually why that was supposed to be the middle episodes. But yeah, he wanted to do that, and he couldn't get the rights. And same with a similar deal with Watchmen. You know about that one?
Are we talking about the
comic book Watchmen, Alan Moore?
What about it? Oh, we're talking about the whole Charlton thing.
Yeah, it was originally going to be the Charlton. Blue Beetle was Night Owl. It was all going to Captain Atom and Dr. Manhattan. It was going to be the Charlton characters, and DC was like, nah, we paid a couple bucks to get this. We don't want you to fuck it up and turn them into a bunch of weirdos. So just make up characters that are like those characters, and you're kind of set free by doing that. So, this guy got to actually make the Blade Runner movie, which is why it'll be too bad if it makes no money and he doesn't get to work in this.
No, it's obvious from the finished product how much it meant to him, and how passionate he was about it. And I've actually seen and listened to some interviews with him, and yeah, I mean he's a total fanboy about it. But at the same time, to me, just handled it so well.
Right.
I mean, so many sequels fail to live up to the original, and I would even make the argument that while this is by no means a perfect film, I would argue that it may even be better than the original Blade Runner.
One of the things that I thought about during the course of the movie is the scope is certainly much larger, right? Yeah. You go a lot of different places, both emotionally and literally.
Yeah.
That you don't in Blade Runner. There's a depth to the characters that is certainly pretty much devoid. In Blade Runner.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that there's a lot of ways in which it's almost kind of like the difference between Blue Suede Shoes and the White Album. You know what I mean? Like there's been a lot that's happened since Blade Runner came out. And there's been a lot of things that Blade Runner influenced.
Oh, absolutely.
To such a degree that you can now make a movie that delves into that world. And that I think viewers are kind of more ready for it now, too. I think that maybe like the Marvel movies have sort of primed people to sort of feel like there's a lot more that they're willing. There's a lot more moving pieces that I think people are willing to acknowledge and deal with within a universe.
Well, it's interesting to hear you say that because... I don't know how much I agree with that.
Right.
I mean, I agree with it, but I don't know how much that applies to the masses just simply because seemingly no one besides me and you were interested in seeing this thing. you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, maybe maybe that's why they thought they could do it, and then it turns out they can't.
Yeah, and I mean, and so the fact...
not enough one-liners.
Yeah, so I mean, the fact that... the original was a commercial failure, and now this one is setting up to become a commercial failure, at least domestically. Yeah. It's unfortunate. So, I mean, it's like, what the fuck do people want?
I don't know.
I mean, do you want a good sequel? Do you just want... and I'm not going to get started on this, but people who know me know very well that I think a lot of these superhero films that Marvel and DC are producing are mediocre at best.
Yeah. I
mean, I think that this film is far superior to anything that I've seen DC or Marvel do.
Yeah, I'll agree with you on that for sure. Yeah, but I think that the Marvel movies are they're like fast food.
Yeah,
they're like really good fast food.
Yeah, I agree.
Maybe like instances of fast food that are much better than they used to be. You know, like Hardee's or Sonic. I think those are good fast food. I ate a lot of fast food because I'm on the road a lot. I don't have a lot of money. Yeah, no, I would say so. And one of the things too that I thought about during the course of the movie, and I look forward to talking to you about, is a lot of times when you watch movies and you're watching the subjects of the movie that you were watching, and they live in some world that's not our world, and you're thinking like, okay, so this is what 007 is like, huh? Like, he's pretty badass. I wonder what 008 is up to. What's 003 like, right? We've done 25 movies with this guy and however many books. I wonder what those other guys are like. And then you're like, oh, well, the reason that we're following this guy is that he's the main guy. He's the baddest ass. And he's the one that's the reason they made the movie about him, right? The reason it's Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. The reason in Star Wars, obviously, that we follow Luke Skywalker is that they end up being the one who did it, right? And that's why they're the main one. Okay? So with Blade Runner, one of the things, too, is that you never see what being a Blade Runner is actually like in Blade Runner, right? He gets called into the office, and then it's just a smoky room, and that's it. And he's retired or semi-retired or whatever. And like, well, what do they do? Like, what did they used to be? Did they have a uniform? Did they wear helmets?
Right.
You know, did they fucking like ride on mechanical horses? Like, what was it like to be a Blade Runner back when there were still Blade Runners? So when you watch Blade Runner, the original one, it's like, well, this is just the story of a guy who might be a real guy, or he might be a replicant who decides to buck the system a little bit. And, you know, there's the great Tears in the Rain line.
Yeah.
Which I remembered that. It was weird because, like, I remembered, like, as Rutger Hauer, who is an actor who probably doesn't get enough credit because he's so weird looking. He's a weird looking guy, so there's not a lot of movies he could do.
He is, but, you know, you and I both grew up in the 80s, and he was a part of, you know, films that, you know, arguably mean something more to us than they do audiences today.
So.
Yeah.
Certainly, yeah. But, you know, his whole line about I've seen things that human eyes have never seen.
Yeah.
The sunrise on whatever, you know, like all that stuff. And then Tears in the Rain.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, like, that is really heavy.
Did you notice, real quick, that the music playing as Kay lies dying was the same music that was playing when Roy Batty's character, Rutger Hauer's character, Roy Batty is dying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the main reason is that I recognize that cheesy Vangelis. I'm just not a fan of that new age stuff, man, I guess. But anyway, so now, in the context of this movie, the reason that it was so important to follow those characters was that they ended up being the parents of the first ever replicant who was actually born. Right? And that's a really big deal. And that's something that's really heavy to fuck with if you're somebody that loves a movie and you're making a sequel, albeit a different story, to say, like, well, they had a kid.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So then what's interesting, too, about it being an existential thing is it's like, okay, so a lot of dudes fucked a lot of replicants. There's no way a bunch of replicants got fucked in a lot of different ways.
Right.
You can be sure about that, right? Go ahead and check out Westworld if you're curious about different ways that replicants can get fucked.
Literally.
But this was the first time, quite possibly, that a replicant was made love to. Right?
Yeah.
Because Deckard loved Rachel. So maybe part of the story is that through that love, that's how a soul is created in the case of a robot and a person.
Yeah. No, I see where you're
and then that's how a person was made.
Yeah. No,
that's if you're looking at it in a very flowery way.
I see where you're going with this.
Right.
And I mean, it certainly ask a lot of tough questions about, the meaning of life, and certainly God,
Right.
and how much love plays into conception.
Right. Now, obviously it doesn't, and it doesn't have to be that way at all. But and if the movie had said, because of our love, a person was born, I would have gotten up and walked out. I would have thought that was really heavy-handed and stupid. But maybe that's like one of the things that you're supposed to kind of toy with and think about.
Yeah.
If you bother to think that much about this movie,
which obviously we have.
we obviously are. Yeah. But I thought it was very well done, and it honestly sort of exceeded my expectations.
It did. It did mine as well.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's just as visually stunning as what the original is. Like you were talking about how this film not only is it set in Los Angeles in 2049, we take a little road trip to Vegas, and I loved the lighting that was done in Vegas.
Right. Well, and just all of Vegas. Who expected an Elvis Presley cameo?
Well, and I'm sure you appreciated the nods to Sinatra.
Sure, yeah.
Throughout this film as well.
That made me want to have that happen. That's my favorite Elvis period. When he was so very quick aside. Elvis Presley was making a lot of stupid movies. He didn't like what he was doing. He was making money, and he was okay with it. And then in 1968, they were going to make a Christmas special. There was a guy named Steve Shores, I believe, who said, "Hey, look, we shouldn't do a Christmas special. We've got you on the hook here. We could make this something." They were shooting in Burbank, California, and Elvis was like, "Hey, man, I'm just going to make a Christmas show, man. It just doesn't seem like a good idea to me, man." And Steve said, "All right, here's what I want you to do. I want you to walk over to the corner. Instead of sending one of your guys, I want you yourself to go to the corner, get one of those cheeseburgers you like, order a Pepsi, and see what happens." "No, man, they'll mob me, man. I can't go out there. It'll go crazy. I'll go plumb crazy, man." "Come on, Elvis, just go out there and do it." So he did it. He goes over. He gets his own cheeseburger, middle of the day. Maybe one or two people says, "Oh, hey, it's Elvis, cool." He comes back and he says, "You're right, man. Let's do this. Let's do this, son of a bitch." So that's when he did the black leather outfit and all that sort of stuff, right? It was sort of a live, vibrant Elvis Presley again. And then he decided to go ahead and attack the music industry. And he got in really good shape. And he did shows in Las Vegas, which became a movie called That's the Way It Is. And that series of shows from 1970 was what that clip was from.
Oh, really?
So that shows me that somebody gave enough of a fuck about Elvis to say, let's get the good Elvis Vegas period stuff in this movie.
Well, that's the, and something else that comes to mind is just, using Elvis, Sinatra, Liberace to a certain extent. I mean, these are all, it's timeless.
Yes.
And I think that as foreign as the first Blade Runner film felt, it also felt familiar,
right?
And this one had a similar feeling to it.
Well, and there's a sense that Blade Runner, the world of Blade Runner, there's no longer any culture being made. Certainly no more pulp culture. So all there is like
the good old
music.
days.
Yeah, right. And of course, when you're watching, it's funny that you always wonder what they're thinking when they're making a movie about the future, and they're going for like that 5 minutes in the future thing. Because Blade Runner didn't feel like 5 minutes in the future in 1982 or 83 when it came out. And to have it set during what would be within the lifetime of the people that were making it, it's funny that they went so far out. And I appreciate that they didn't find some way to retcon it or say, oh, actually they meant 30. The calendars were wrong. It was actually 3017. That's why everything's so fucked up and there's no internet.
Did you ever read Philip K. Dick's "Do Android Dream of
I did
Electric
not.
Sleep"?
I'm familiar with it, but I've never read it.
Yeah, that was they adopted that into
Blade Runner
comic form.
Oh, okay.
Recently as well. I think it was maybe 20, 30
Now, in
issues
that,
long.
did they state a date in that? Was it like 2017 in that?
I did not
2019?
I did not read it.
Okay.
So I can't say.
Yeah. But I mean, it's funny. I like that they just went with it anyway, and they just anything after 2000 seems like the future anyway. Still to me, so it's like okay, all right.
Did you watch or have you heard about the shorts that were made that kind of bridge the gap between the original
when those
and the
were
new
coming out, I wasn't watching them because I didn't have 20 minutes or 5 minutes at the time.
Yeah.
And then I saw that you posted them on Facebook, and I went back and watched them, and I was very glad that I did.
Oh, cool.
Because I felt like they were very helpful in understanding what the fuck was going on.
Well, that's cool. I'm glad you checked it out.
Yeah. I'd also like to say that I'm very proud of Dave Bautista.
Yeah, he does a very good job in this. Not a large amount of screen time.
Yeah.
But he does a lot with
he
what
does
he has.
good with what he has. And the short with him was really good because it really makes you understand like what a good-hearted entity he is. Dave Bautista used to wrestle in Louisville. There's a thing called OVW that is still kind of around. That was like the farm club for WWE. They would send wrestlers there to sort of train and put on a little show locally.
Yeah.
John Cena was a wrestler. Brock Lesnar was another, and there's a few other guys that went on to be WWE guys, and they were kind of WWE. They were on their way. They were developmental.
Yeah.
And during the time that he was here, he was called Leviathan, and it was a very old school show. It was done by Jim Cornette, who's a total old school wrestling guy. And the story was that he was a creature who had come from the Ohio River, right? Old school. So he didn't talk, and he was like this monster. And
it sounds very Killer Croc.
Yeah. Well, and Jim Cornette's a big comic book guy, so that may have been. And nobody in wrestling has ever been above ripping off ideas. So that was what Dave Bautista was. And during that time, I was really very into wrestling and the backstage parlance of wrestling and all that sort of stuff. And I actually wrote for a thing called the Pro Wrestling Torch, which is a newsletter for wrestling geeks. And I would review the OVW shows. And I would say, this guy is pretty good. This guy's maybe not so good. I don't know if this guy's got a future. This guy maybe does. And I was always kind of afraid they'd figure out who I was and I was around and kill me or something, But every so often I would put my email address on there. And I got an email from Dave Bautista. This was, 20 years ago. And he said, I've got these offers to go to Japan. And Japan is actually a big wrestling place. Like there's all sorts of great wrestling in Japan, and
a lot of famous wrestlers have cut their teeth there.
Certainly have. Yeah, and a lot of times guys who are successful will go there for a run, and it's tough. Japan is very stiff, which means they'll really hit you over there, drop you on your head, all that kind of stuff. So he said, you seem like you know what's going on. I've got offers to go to Japan. Do you think I should go? I was like, give me a call, because I want to make sure it was really him. And he called, and he had a cold at the time. He's like, sorry, man, I got a cold. I was like, you sound like Leviathan to me, man. Creature from the deep. And I told him, I said, okay, here's the deal. Vince McMahon is well known for kind of playing games with people. And, like the Ultimate Warrior was a guy who was a cocaine-addled monster who one time at a major pay-per-view said, unless you produce a briefcase with $5 million, I'm not going out tonight. He never wants to have that happen again. So he's going to test you, and he's going to make you go to Louisville and be Leviathan, and he's going to call up older guys before you, and he's going to see how you're wired before he gives you a shot. And in the long run, I ended up being right about that. So he and I used to talk on the phone and stuff.
That's
It was
cool.
cool. And then he got too busy to even do that. But he was always very gracious and nice to me.
Now, does he still wrestle?
No. What's funny about that is that they had an angle. That's what they call backstage storylines in wrestling. He had an angle where, so the way that it's set up is that WrestleMania is the biggest show.
Right.
They have Royal Rumble a couple of months before that, where all the guys get in the ring and fight at once. They get called down. They go 1 through 30 every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
The last guy in the ring is the guy who faces the champion at WrestleMania.
Yeah.
Right?
The last man standing.
Right. The guy, because everybody gets thrown over the top rope.
Right.
So that's a good way to set it up storyline wise, where like a guy can still look really strong and lose Royal Rumble. Because Steve Austin is bad as fuck, but 5 guys threw him out. He was number 12. Oh, well, he didn't win.
Yeah.
So storyline wise, he still looks good. Doesn't lose any heat. that kind of thing. So it was the year that Guardians of the Galaxy was about to come out, right? Like it was on its way to being a thing. And Dave Bautista won the Royal Rumble. He had been gone from wrestling for a while, and he came back, and he did this. And the intention was that the fans would be like, yeah, Batista, we love Batista, we're glad he's back. But that's not what happened. The fans booed him mercilessly. They were like, you left, you don't get to come back. Right? So then they had to change the angle around. And he was like, I'm never doing this again. Fuck you people.
Wow.
I'm out here bleeding, busting my ass. I'm old. I got other shit I could be doing. So I think he's done with wrestling. And, you know, he was in Spectre. He was good in that. He kicked James Bond's ass. James Bond could only kill him by cheating. He had his girlfriend's help. You know, we're not friends, but I'm proud of him. I remember when we were friendly, and I'm very glad to see that he's doing well. He's a good guy. I can legitimately say that he's a good dude.
That's cool. Well, believe it or not, we've not jumped around a lot with this film. Obviously, we've left a lot of details out, but we're barreling towards the end here.
Yeah.
So we find out, you know, Kay's story is not in fact the hero story.
Right.
He's an average Joe.
Yeah.
Just like the rest of us.
Yeah. And he's actually called Joe.
Yeah. And so, despite not having manifest destiny, so to speak, he embraces this purpose for trying to reunite father and daughter.
Right.
And he eventually achieves that.
Yeah.
Basically at the cost of what is probably his own life.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you sort of see him just sort of bleeding out there at the end. I mean, it doesn't really say whether or not, you know, he dies, but I certainly interpreted it as, you know, he did in fact die.
Yeah.
And there's that interesting parallel.
Well, it seemed like the end of Drive, too. Very similar to the end of Drive.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen Drive.
Oh shit! I'm so sorry.
No. You're fine.
You need to see Drive.
Well, you know, it's funny you say that because I actually had no interest in this movie, but because it has meant so much to you that it's actually piqued my interest.
Drive is a fantastic movie.
So,
it's one of my favorite movies ever.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we'll definitely talk about it once I get a chance to check it out. Then.
Good idea.
But there's that interesting parallel at the end as he lay dying in the snow, which I don't know what that says about the world in 2049, but it snows all the time in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
But
it rains and snows. It's supposed to be like an acidic rain problem of some sort, something to do with the atmosphere.
I sort of took that as environmental.
That's better than everybody being so high that they have to wear shorts and tank tops all the time, which is what's really happening.
Yeah. But there's that interesting parallel as he lays dying in the snow. You cut to inside, and there is Deckard's daughter, and she's essentially creating this storyline, this memory using snow.
Right. Yeah.
So I thought that was an interesting parallel.
Yeah.
But so safe to say you like this film.
A lot. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
I actually, a friend of mine, we were planning on going to see it sometime in the next week, and he hadn't gotten back to me with a time or a day that would work for him. And then another friend of mine said, let's go see it tomorrow, yesterday. And I was like, yeah, I didn't even want to wait. And I already know I want to see it again, even though it's 3 hours long. So.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. So you would watch it again?
I'm going to watch it again in just a few days.
Okay.
And I expect to sort of see things differently.
Yeah. This is a movie that I would revisit. I own so few like Blu-ray and DVD. I only own like maybe a dozen, maybe 18 films.
Yeah.
I don't like to revisit a lot of films. There's so much great stuff out there.
Sure.
Who has the time?
I like bonus features a lot, though, man.
Who has the time to sit and just watch the same movies all the time?
I don't know. There's a lot of good stuff out there, and we don't really know how much time we have left here on planet Earth. So,
well, to continue with this existential theme,
right.
no, I would watch it again and look forward to the DVD Blu-ray release. I imagine it will probably be just loaded with extras.
One of the things that I want to touch on very quickly,
Sure.
before we wrap this up, because we've gone longer than I think we meant to, is one of the things that I really like about the movie is that his digital girlfriend experience is not in any way unique to him, and that's all he's got.
Yeah.
And you find that out in the scene where they get to sort of like make love because she joins whatever it is, and then you see an ad for her basically where it's like anybody can get it. Anybody that has $20 or whatever can have that in their house, and it's like a video game is to us.
There was just something just so lonely about that.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, really, here you have this guy who is seemingly, I mean, let's face it, he may not be the godchild,
Right.
but he is self-aware.
Yeah.
And you see that continue to grow throughout the film. He disobeys orders. They give replicants this, this cruel test
Right.
to see if they're becoming more
Which
human.
seems like, and the good thing about that too, and that's something else that's worth mentioning, is that the old test was, and I always have loved that opening scene with Leon, where it's like, you come upon a tortoise in the desert, right?
Yeah.
And I've done that to people. It's always been sort of a fun thing when like somebody's acting weird and like not like themselves or not like a person. I'll say, I have a very important question for you. You come upon a tortoise in the desert. And if they know the movie, they think it's really funny. And if not, they're like, what are you talking about? Or
They start acting like Leon.
best case scenario is they don't know the movie, but someone by them does. And then they know what the joke is. And then they don't know the joke. But, the new version of that is, what was it? It's like you have to repeat. Like strand or cell.
Yeah, I mean, it was. To be honest with you, I'm not even entirely sure what it was, but they essentially would bring these replicants back in after missions and
look at their eyes and their throats and how they're
and it would basically test their emotional
Right.
response to things. And if they could be cold and calculated, then
Right.
they passed.
Yeah.
But if there was like any
were not
hesitation,
baseline.
if they were off baseline,
Yeah.
then they would essentially be retired.
Right, yeah.
Robin Wright Penn's character
Yeah.
has an affinity for him.
Yeah.
Really tries to get with him at
Right,
one
yeah.
point.
Yeah.
And so she sort of essentially allows him to escape
Yeah.
to continue his mission.
Right.
And I mean, it's really, other than her and arguably Deckard,
Yeah.
depending on what your thoughts are with that,
Right.
not and Jared Leto's character, not a lot of humans in this film.
No, yeah. Yeah,
Really, a lot of
isn't.
AI, a lot of replicants.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that I want to talk about the test too is that if you've watched the little short movies, then you know that the blackout was caused by basically a war between replicants and humans that was, broke out or was about to break out, and that the replicants struck back hard and fucked up a lot of shit, and then that's why people are really like anti-replicant, and that's why it goes from you come upon a tortoise in the desert to do they keep you in a box?
Yeah.
Have you ever touched a child? It's now a lot harsher because culture has switched.
Oh yeah.
And it's not hard to see a lot of parallels to that in our world in the way that people treat people of the Muslim faith or from the Middle East.
Anyone who is not perceived as being the norm.
Yeah, right. So I don't think that was. I wouldn't say that it wasn't heavy-handed, but it's certainly in there.
Oh yeah, no, I mean he walks into the station, that cop.
Yeah, fuck off, skin job.
Yeah, he says fuck off, skin job.
Yeah.
He goes to his apartment. Someone's written something profane on his door.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's obviously not an easy life
Right.
as a replicant, and I guess people assume that they're just artificial. They don't feel anything.
Right.
But it's not the case with Kay. It's not the case with a lot of replicants that we learn.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, to be arguably more human than human, yet be dehumanized the way they are.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I also like when there's the line where Jared Leto's sort of ace. Is her name Love?
I can't remember her name, but
I think it's just her name is Love. Maybe.
But basically his right hand woman.
Right. Like there's a part where she's talking to Kay and she says something like, "They used to make us a lot harder to tell."
Yeah.
Like they made us.
Oh, when they were going through that archival footage. Yeah.
So, yeah, you know, I thought it was a great movie. And
yeah.
I hope it does better. I hope it does well enough that people aren't like making jokes about it from now on.
Well, I think it will be one of these films that, you know, it may not be the next big blockbuster. I mean, I think that's obvious after this weekend, but I think it is a film that people will still be talking about in 20 years.
I do too. I totally agree.
Much like its predecessor.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
All right, man.
Is that all we got?
I think that's good, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Till next time.
Till next time, whenever that is.